It's pretty nice if you ask me. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Official test start time. Um, 2 minutes, 5 pages, 5 paragraphs each, 5 revisions, 5 words per sentence, 5 sentences per paragraph, 5 computer spaces in between. You can use your hyperscientific, you can use any artificial intelligence, any technology, but you must show the work and share it with the class. If you do not show the work and share it with the class, I'm going to assume that all you did was use technology and you will get zero credit for it. All right, we ready? Let's rock and roll. We finally have some news. Before we get started, let me just take care of a few things. I need to make some adjustments here. See where I even put these settings here. Hold on. Oh, I could just get this out of the way, right? All right. So, and this, close this out. Um, First and foremost, finally, open up your Baha apps. We have a lot of research to do. Um, we're going to start with ETS. That's the first thing. Um, Open up your simulators. Just have it online. Um, let's go Dominican newspapers. Let's go Google News. We're going to get it done today, baby. All right. Excellent. Core Ultra Series Intel NVIDIA spoke yesterday. So we got to go over all of that. We got to go over all of that. Let me see. And let's go to Bloomberg. Go to channel. Go to videos. And look for the China show, which I just saw, but the Asia trade. I want to see um, the Asia trade first because it's 1 hour ahead of the market. So um, let's rock and roll.
At Mesothelioma Claim Center, we won over $5 million for our clients. Don't wait. This is the Asia Trade. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney.
I'm Eva Long in Singapore. Your top stories this hour. Asian stocks set to extend record highs after tech leads gains on Wall Street. Geopolitical risks around the U.S. capture of Venezuela's president sparking gains for treasuries, oil, and gold. Nicolas Maduro and his wife pleading not guilty to drug violence and weapons charges, setting off a major legal battle over the Trump administration's intervention. Also ahead, South Korea's president hits the reset button on relations with China. Lee Jae-myung meeting with Xi Jinping for the second time in 2 months.
And I'm Annabelle Drewlers at CES in Las Vegas, where top tech names are set for a hard sell on AI. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang opening the show by hyping new Rubin data center products that are nearing release.
And those comments from the NVIDIA chief may be adding to the enthusiasm surrounding AI in the Asian session again today, which, of course, yesterday we saw the region's benchmark, MSCI Asia Pacific, hitting those record highs supported by all-time highs on South Korea, Taiwan gauges. Although the shift may be towards the focus on fundamentals in terms of earnings into the next couple of weeks, we are seeing that really tech rally supporting Asian equities overall. So a bit of a turnaround from what we saw in the later parts of.
Dios me lo bendiga, sobrino, buenos días. Yo estoy en el gym, pero you want me to head back, or you want to pass by the McDonald's and just pick up the key? Ok, Tato, pasa por aquí entonces, ya la va. Okay, Tato, you send me. Don't worry. I'll walk out there. All right, then.
Of 2025. Now, in terms of what we're seeing in Japan, there is that bullish optimism coming through as well. Some of the brokerages say they could see those 62,000 levels on the Nikkei before the year is up. So it looks like the tech theme extension of gains, that's what we're going to be watching in the session today, Paul.
Let's get you some breaking news out of Australia. BlueScope Steel surging in early trade, now better by close to 19%. Now, this is on news that broke last night. BlueScope confirming media rumors that have been swirling that had received an unsolicited bid from a consortium including SGH Steel Dynamics, valuing the company at $30 per share. That would give BlueScope a total valuation of $8.8 billion US. SGH is controlled by the Australian billionaire Kerry Stokes. BlueScope, quite an attractive target. It does get 45% of its revenue from North America. The company's knocked back previous bids, but says it is considering this one. However, the bid is subject to numerous conditions, but shares are surging in the early going here in Australia, the best performing stock on the index. Let's take a look at what else has been going on in the US. We did have the climbing. Chevron had a very good day. So did most of the US oil majors on the news flow out of Venezuela. Chevron is, of course, the only US oil major currently operating Venezuela due to a special license. We also had oil pretty much shrugging off all of these concerns at the end of the day, modestly higher as well. Venezuelan oil exports fell to a 17-month low back in December due to the US blockade, but not all oil prices rose. Canadian heavy crude hit a one-year low on the prospect of a bit of competition, perhaps, coming out of Venezuela. April.
Yeah, on that note, we are hearing, of course, how the ousted Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro has faced a U.S. court along with his wife and pleaded not guilty to those narco-terrorism charges. And their appearance before a New York judge sets off this extraordinary legal battle that could have major geopolitical ramifications. Let's get to Washington and Bloomberg Balance of Power co-anchor Joe Matthew joins us now for more on this. So, Joe, what were you hearing about what's come out of the courthouse in relation to Maduro? Where does this leave his fate?
Well, it's a great question, and you just put your finger on the real headline today, which is a not guilty plea, a red headline in the terminal that may not have come as a surprise. There was a dramatic moment in the courtroom when Maduro said loudly that he was kidnapped from his home in Caracas and that he was still, in fact, the rightful president of Venezuela. But the fact of the matter is, as Maduro was being hauled into court, Delcy Rodriguez was, in fact, being sworn in by the legislature in Venezuela as acting president, suggesting that this is, in fact, something that the United States supports and is part of in working with Rodriguez, who had some difficult rhetoric for the Trump administration on Saturday, but issued a statement yesterday saying that her regime, if I can call it that, looks to partner and work with the United States as it moves forward here. But there are still huge questions about what happens in this case involving Maduro and his wife, one that could move on for years. He's made his way back to the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is a federal jail in Brooklyn, known as a pretty ugly place to be. This is the jail that held El Chapo, is currently holding Luigi Mangione. Ghislaine Maxwell was there. P. Diddy and Sam Bankman-Fried at times has had no running water and is a far cry, no heat as well at times, a far cry from a presidential palace in Caracas.
Joe, you mentioned Delcy Rodriguez, now acting president in Venezuela, striking a conciliatory, cooperative tone with the Trump administration. But is what she says matching on the ground what's happening in Venezuela?
Well, look, and we also have to remind everybody that the president of the United States says he reserves another strike if this doesn't work out well. So there might be a good reason why this conciliatory tone was being struck by someone, and there we see her on our screen, who demonized the Trump administration on Saturday and said that Maduro was the rightful leader of Venezuela. Now that she's been sworn in as acting president, it is believed that she will be working closely with the U.S. government, with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others. But it also reminds us of the fact that the rest of the Maduro regime is still there. They only took the head of this government, and in fact, there are many folks there who the administration might slowly want to have removed. So this is the beginning of a very confusing situation in which the president says the U.S. is in fact running Venezuela.
Part of concerns also is the extent in which U.S. oil companies might invest into Venezuela. We're hearing that the U.S. Energy Secretary is set to speak with some of these oil executives. What do we know?
Yeah, he's going to be at a Goldman Sachs energy conference later this week in which the CEOs of the majors will be there. As you mentioned earlier, Chevron is the one U.S. integrated oil company that's doing business in Venezuela. ConocoPhillips and other companies, though, are scheduled to attend this event. It's the Goldman Clean Tech and Utilities Conference, and it's happening in Miami this week. This is apparently where they will sit down and compare notes. President Trump has made it pretty clear that he expects everybody's going to want a piece of this apple, the largest untapped oil reserve, I believe, on the planet. But the smart analysis also tells us that this will require about a $100 billion investment over the course of 10 years to shore up Venezuela's oil infrastructure, which has been dilapidated and led to corrode for many years. So there's going to have to be a major investment before anybody starts making money here, and it could take some time.
With Quicken's adaptive spending plans, projected cash flow, and watch lists, you'll build habits to smash all your financial goals way faster than any basic money app will. Smash your money goals with Quicken. If you live in Florida and have a good driving record, you're being scammed by big auto insurance. Listen up. I don't care if you think you have good insurance rates.
Making money here, and it could take some time.
All right, our Washington correspondent and co-anchor of Bloomberg Balance of Power, Joe Matthew there. Thanks for joining us. Let's get to our next guest now. Jason Maxak is Vice President and Senior Director at the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. Jason, thanks for joining us. I just want to pick up with some of the other goings-on today. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, said that this is not a U.S. occupation. He's described it as a law enforcement operation. Delcy Rodriguez, nominally the acting president of Venezuela, but who's really in charge at the moment?
Well, Delcy Rodriguez is the acting president of Venezuela. She was sworn in today at the National Assembly. What the U.S. has said insofar as the President Trump's comments on running the country, and Secretary Rubio has clarified this, is that what the U.S. has is it has leverage in Venezuela right now, because if the Delcy Rodriguez does not take the steps outlined by the United States, there is the possibility of not only more attacks, but potentially even graver actions than what we saw over the course of the weekend.
Has anything really changed, though? As Joe was pointing out, a lot of the regime Maduro loyalists still in place, and while Delcy Rodriguez, on the one hand, is striking this conciliatory cooperative tone, on the grounds there are reports of Chavista loyalists detaining people, stopping motorists, asking questions. Has anything really changed on the ground, and how do you see this unfolding?
Look, I haven't seen things change on the ground in the last couple of days. I mean, just today with the inauguration of the new National Assembly in Venezuela, there are reports of 13 members of international press and media organizations being detained by the Sabine, the secret police in Venezuela. Sabine detentions is something that has historically occurred under the Maduro regime. We saw that again today with Delcy Rodriguez now as acting president. But what the U.S. will need to do is to hold Rodriguez accountable for actually moving forward on the actions that President Trump has identified as key to U.S. priorities: criminal organizations, getting rid of narcotics trafficking, opening up the oil sector, and stamping out adverse foreign influence.
How exactly do you expect Rodriguez to be in the perhaps months ahead until we see an election engaging with Washington?
She's going to have to walk a very difficult political tightrope, and we saw her do that over the weekend. On Saturday, vehement statements rejecting the U.S. actions. On Sunday, pledging to cooperate with the United States. So she's going to have to do that to maintain the loyalty of the Chavista base, but at the same time avoid further actions by the United States. And so far as elections, that hasn't been part of the conversation publicly coming from the U.S. Elections will need to occur at a certain point. Those elections and actually bringing in the government that is supported by the people will be fundamental to bringing in that long-term investment that Venezuela needs.
What is your sense on when an election might be held, and if it is held, whether the results will be upheld?
Well, if we want to go by Article 234 of the Venezuelan Constitution, she can remain in the post for 90 days as acting president. That can be renewed for another 90 days. That gives you 6 months, at which point they'd have to be a decision that there's an absolute vacancy in the presidency, in which she would assume that elections in 30 days. However, the Supreme Court of Venezuela has said that those rules don't apply, similar to when Chavez passed a decade ago. So there isn't a clear timetable of when elections would need to happen. Now, the key is not to have elections for the sake of elections. There have been elections in the past. There have been elections in Venezuela repeatedly throughout this century, none of which have been free and fair. And so to actually have an election that's respected by the international community, that respects the will of the Venezuelan voters, and that will actually give security to investors insofar as the government that's in power, those elections need to be free and fair by international standards.
Yeah, Jason, to that point, if an election is held, what happens if, I'm not sure how to phrase this, the wrong people win? Because President Trump's already ruled out a role, for the opposition leader Machado in this process.
Well, he hasn't ruled out Machado in competing in an election. What he's done is he said, look, Delcy Rodriguez is already there in Caracas. We're gonna see if we can play ball with her. Hopefully we can. This is a gamble, but he and Secretary Rubio. Secretary Rubio in particular has expressed his admiration again for Machado, and so I think that there still is a pathway for Machado and Nuno Gonzalez. That pathway will have to be through elections, and those elections would need to be free and fair.
As we pointed out earlier, there are a lot of members of the Maduro regime still entrenched in the bureaucracy and the politics of the country as well. Do you view this as a mistake, or would it have been a mistake to remove them? Because is the US learning some lessons here from Iraq, when Saddam Hussein loyalists were cleaned out wholesale and things fell apart very quickly?
Yeah, first, this is not Iraq. This is Venezuela in 2026. This is not Iraq. We don't have boots on the ground. We're not actually governing the country from a day-to-day basis. We're not doing, education, healthcare. What the U.S. is doing is exacting its leverage to cajole Delcy Rodriguez to take the actions that are necessary. So it's a very different dynamic from Iraq, and I think the U.S. has learned its lessons insofar as nation building. And this President Trump, is not interested in the business of nation building.
The reason we created these initial robots was to solve a pretty basic problem.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. From Iraq, and I think the U.S. has learned its lessons insofar as nation building, and this President Trump, is not interested in the business of nation building.
It also feels, though, like this episode a reminder of the Trump administration and the president himself, very determined to impose his world order. What is Venezuela going to? How is it going to be engaging with Beijing, with China amid all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, there was a Chinese delegation that was supposedly in Caracas at the time of the operation. Look, I mean, the Venezuela-China relationship. Venezuela had $60 billion in loans from the Chinese. They've been repaying through oil. Most of that had actually been repaid at this point. I think in some ways this is actually an opportunity for China to be able to offload the Venezuela problem now to the U.S., which now essentially owns what happens in Venezuela moving forward. I think this is a first deliverable from President Trump's new national security strategy that has a heavy Western Hemisphere focus, and as part of that focus reflects the importance for the administration on ensuring that foreign powers that are adversarial to the United States don't have a significant footprint in the hemisphere.
Jason, thank you for your time and your analysis today. Great to chat. Jason Mossart is Vice President at the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. Now, coming up on the Asia Trade, we talk investment strategy with Moneta, who remain cautious on the Magnificent Seven. KB Securities tells us why they believe China could surprise markets with aggressive restructuring this year. And Lagora joins us later with the outlook for Australia's AI sector. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Vera CPU. It's got 88 CPU cores, and the CPU cores are designed to be multi-threaded. But the multi-threaded nature of Vera was designed so that each one of the 176 threads could get its full performance. So it's essentially as if there's 176 cores, but only 88 physical cores. So these cores were designed in using a technology called spatial multi-threading. But the I/O performance is incredible.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang speaking as the annual CES opens in Las Vegas. Our Asia correspondent Annabelle Jolis is there for us live. So, Belle, you're at the event. What are the big announcements from NVIDIA so far?
Yeah, that's right. First time that Asia TV's actually come here to CES, and I have to say it's really at a scale and a magnitude that I hadn't really been able to appreciate. But the final preparations are underway right now as Jensen Huang has actually kicked off CES for 2026, just finishing that keynote in the last 30 minutes or so. But really, one of the biggest announcements he had was around what you were just hearing there, this Rubin architecture. It's essentially the successor to Blackwell. It's a lot more powerful. It can do a lot more with a lot less energy demands as well. So you're getting a bit of a nod to that just in that soundbite we just played. But essentially, he's saying that the production has started. They're going to be ramping that up into the end of 2026, and it has been something designed specifically for gigawatt AI factories. Now, gigawatt AI factories, you're essentially talking as well about what he addressed during that presentation, which is that AI is becoming a lot more complex, and so as a result, it needs a lot more compute power, and that's what he's saying, that they're basically preparing these products to address that need. It's interesting, as we ended 2025, we were talking still a lot about those AI bubbles. He didn't address that specifically in the presentation, but I think he did nod to it when he talked about the demand that he's seeing and how essentially the entire computing industry is changing, and that is driving this big shift in R&D budgets as well from companies across a range of different industries. So essentially saying NVIDIA is at the center of the AI ecosystem, and again, that demand is very much still there for the company. But interesting to note, of course, Jensen Huang's still talking about these products a lot earlier in the year than he would typically do.
Bill, Jensen Huang was also speaking about autonomous driving. What did he have to say about that?
Yeah, Yeah, it was a really big focus as well in the earlier part of the presentation, more on that sort of embodied AI or physical AI, and to that end, automotive certainly were a big part. So he's announced what's called the Alpamayo model. So he's saying that this is the world's first reasoning autonomous vehicle AI. So I don't want to get too technical on it, but what he's saying is essentially it's solving for the so-called long tail, which is when you're out in the world, you're driving your vehicle, and you come across very messy or unpredictable situations. And so far, he's saying that the autonomous driving software technology hasn't really been able to solve for that. But he's saying that Alpamayo will have those capabilities. It'll be able to stop, reason with more human-like capabilities, and then make a decision. And that's what he's saying is going to be the really big difference.
This event that you're at, of course, Bell, is really one of the ones where the biggest names in tech gather. What else are you looking forward to at the event?
Getting paid from your bank, here's how to get your money to make you money. You set up a high-yield checking and savings account with eligible direct.
Yeah, well, it's the biggest names, and then it's also the names that maybe you haven't heard of before as well, because there's all sorts of innovations that we're expecting to see on display. And I think just thinking about mobility, for instance, that's going to be one of the big focus points of the event. And just behind me is actually a product that I've never seen before, which is a motorcycle with two wheels on the front, one in the back. So it's a reverse trike or a tap-on trike. But what is interesting about it is that it's also an eVTOL or an electric vehicle takeoff and landing vehicle. So expecting to see lots of different innovations on display in the mobility space, but also humanoid service robots. They're going to continue to be key. Announcements around digital health, longevity, energy demands as well, because there's that big question how you're going to meet the power needs of AI and computing. So solutions in solar, wind, small nuclear reactors, for instance, next generation batteries. But then also this move to the edge, which we've been talking about for quite a while now, but should be a big focus of CES this year. This is so-called AI everywhere, or edge AI, which is when you have a lot of that sensitive data that ends up being processed locally. And again, just going back to Jensen Huang, he actually did announce or nod to this in his presentation, because he was talking about agentic AI technologies that are going to become a lot more customized. And again, that points to the need for edge AI.
All right, Asia Tech correspondent Annabelle Drew is there at the CES event in Las Vegas. And later on Tuesday, hear exclusive insights from NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang and Siemens CEO Roland Busch. They'll be speaking with Bloomberg after taking the stage at CES in Las Vegas. Plenty more from this event as well. You can catch a special edition of Bloomberg Tech Asia this Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. in Hong Kong, or Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. if you're watching from New York. And subscribers can use the function TV Go or watch live on Bloomberg.com. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
The top global headlines we're following: the U.S. and more than 100 countries have finalized an agreement exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. The deal excludes U.S.-based multinational firms from the 15% global minimum tax negotiated through the OECD. It also effectively blocks other countries from imposing more levies on some foreign subsidiaries of U.S. multinationals. Saudi Arabia cutting the price of its flagship crude for Asia for a third month amid signs of oversupply in the market. State producer Saudi Aramco lowered the price of its Arab Light grade to 30-cent premium to the regional benchmark for February. And this comes as OPEC Plus sticks with its plan to pause supply increases in the first quarter. Paul?
Let's take a look at how commodities are tracking. Copper, we need to point out, did top $13,000 a ton. There's a rush to ship to the US on concerns of future tariff risks. There's also been a number of supply disruptions over recent months, the latest being a strike at a mine in Chile. Oil prices, meanwhile, a little bit softer today. More to come on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung have reaffirmed bilateral ties at their second meeting in 2 months. It's a sign that both sides are working to stabilize relations amid geopolitical tensions. Let's get to our China correspondent, Min Min Lo in Hong Kong. So Min Min, tell us a little bit about the tone of the meeting, and there were quite a lot of MOUs signed as well. What came out of it that was concrete?
Yeah, it was pretty positive, I would say, the tone of it, because this is the second meeting in a couple of months, coming just after the two presidents met in South Korea. So the frequency has been quite high, and President Xi pointing to that as a sign of how important the relationship is. And Lee Jae-myung as well, saying that he wants to start a new era of South Korea-China relations, and that 2026 could be the year where we see a full reset of relations. And one of the things that was quite critical, I think, is that Lee Jae-myung managed to secure a resumption of a ministerial level economic dialogue that was frozen since the THAAD missile crisis. So that's an important breakthrough. And when it comes to trade, I think one of the issues that South Korea is concerned about is that their trade surplus with China has turned into a deficit since 2023, as China started to produce more advanced manufacturing domestically. So President Yi was looking to expand trade, especially in areas like AI, like industrial, cultural goods as well. So he cited things like beauty products, like films, games, and so on, as potential areas for breakthroughs. And we know that China has put an informal ban on South Korean cultural goods since the THAAD missile crisis as well. This is where the presidential aide of Korea has said it could take some time for that to resume, but they are hopeful that if trust continues to build, we could see perhaps potentially large-scale K-pop concerts being held in Beijing again in the longer term.
That being said, Min, all this is coming against a backdrop of really fraught geopolitical tensions. How exactly is all this shaping China-Korea relations?
Yeah, so this is a tricky thing, because it seems like perhaps some of the wins that President Lee Jae-myung had gained is coming at the expense of pressure from China to, quote, stand on the right side of history, because we all know about the China-Japan crisis going on because of Takaichi's comments, and China has been trying to shore up closer ties with South Korea in that crisis, pointing to their efforts during World War II to fight against Japanese militarism together. And President Lee Jae-myung had reaffirmed that South Korea would respect that one China principle. But the other more tricky issue is also North Korea, which fired what is suspected to be ballistic missiles just ahead of that visit. And it's coming after the U.S. has seized President Maduro as well, which some analysts are saying is sending a message to North Korea that it would be suicide for them to abandon their nuclear program. So South Korea has asked for Beijing's help to advance peace in the Korean Peninsula, given that they have been a major economic lifeline to North Korea. But at the same time, that denuclearization push is going to be even harder after that Venezuelan crisis. And it's hard to say what China can do to rein in a leader that is as unpredictable as Kim Jong-un.
Right, that's Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo there. Getting a little bit more news on the situation in Venezuela. Politico has a report, according to a U.S. official familiar with the matter, that the U.S. has made three demands of acting President Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. They say they want to see a crackdown on drug flows, kicking out Iranian, Cuban, and other operatives of countries or networks that are hostile to Washington, and also stop the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries. Now, this is Politico reporting, according to a U.S. official familiar with the situation. Delcy Rodriguez so far has been cooperative, so she doesn't appear to have a lot of choice in the matter. President Trump previously warning that more military action will be coming if Venezuela does not behave. There will be a second strike. Well, former U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says China and Russia have benefited by getting cheap Venezuelan oil. He told us exclusively that President Trump's vision for a U.S.-led revival of Venezuela's oil industry will be a long, complex, and expensive undertaking.
Please, Dad, can we keep it? We'll walk and we'll see it. We'll do.
Yes. Yes. No, I am not. What I'm trying to get rid of, trying to get my Social Security back. They stole my Social Security. I don't really know what to do about this. Yeah. Soon, like within the next week, hopefully find a place that I can do it. I'm looking for a job. I'm in the process of getting right, right. Yeah. don't care about it. I gave you my address. That's my address, dog. Yes. Yes. I haven't found a place yet. Yes, that's fine. Yes. Yes. Well, the reason I'm calling Florida Blues is so I can use an insurance in Florida.
That changes. Going.
So, but I can notify social.
Expensive undertaking. AM in Hong Kong, or Tuesday 7:30 PM if you're watching from New York. And subscribers can.
And computing.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned oil company focused on unleashing American oil from North Dakota and
Specifically in the presentation, but I think he did nod to it when he talked about the demand that he's seeing and how essentially the entire computing industry is changing, and that is driving this big shift in R&D budgets as well from companies. Range of different industries. So essentially saying NVIDIA is at the center of the AI ecosystem, and again that demand is very much still there for the company. But interesting to note, of course, I'm still talking about these products a lot earlier in the year than he would typically do.
Bill, Jensen Huang was also speaking about autonomous driving. What did he have to say about that?
Yeah, it was a really big focus as well in the earlier part of the presentation, more on that sort of embodied AI or physical AI, and to that end, automotive certainly were a big part. So he's announced what's called the Alpamayo model. So he's saying that this is the world's first reasoning autonomous vehicle AI. So I don't want to get too technical on it, but what he's saying is essentially is it's solving for the so-called long tail, which is when you're out in the world, you're driving your vehicle, and you come across very messy or unpredictable situations. And so far, he's saying that the autonomous driving software technology hasn't really been able to solve for that. But he's saying that Alpamayo will have those capabilities. It'll be able to stop, reason with more human-like capabilities, and then make a decision. And that's what he's saying is going to be the really big difference.
This event that you're at, of course, Bell, is really one of the ones where the biggest names in tech gather. What else are you looking forward to at the event?
Yeah, well, it's the biggest names, and then it's also the names that maybe you haven't heard of before as well, because there's all sorts of innovations that we're expecting to see on display. And I think just thinking about mobility, for instance, that's going to be one of the big focus points of the event. And just behind me is actually a product that I've never seen before, which is a motorcycle with two wheels on the front, one in the back. So that's a reverse trike or a tadpole trike. But what is interesting about it is that it's also an eVTOL or an electric vehicle takeoff and landing vehicle. So expecting to see lots of different innovations on display in the mobility space, but also humanoid service robots. They're going to continue to be key. Announcements around digital health, longevity, energy demands as well, because there's that big question how you could meet the power needs of AI and computing. So solutions in solar, wind, small nuclear reactors, for instance, next generation batteries. But then also this move to the edge, which we've been talking about for quite a while now, but should be a big focus of CES this year, this so-called AI everywhere, or edge AI, which is when you have a lot of that sensitive data that ends up being processed locally. And again, just going back to Jensen Huang, he actually did announce or nod to this in his presentation. he was talking about agentic AI technologies that are going to become a lot more customized. And again, that points to the need for edge AI.
All right, Asia Tech correspondent Annabelle Drew was there at the CES event in Las Vegas. And later on Tuesday, hear exclusive insights from NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang and Siemens CEO Roland Busch. They'll be speaking with Bloomberg after taking the stage at CES in Las Vegas. Plenty more from this event as well. You can catch a special edition of Bloomberg Tech Asia this Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. in Hong Kong, or Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. if you're watching from New York. And subscribers can use the function TV Go or watch live on Bloomberg.com. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
The top global headlines we're following. The U.S. and more than 100 countries have finalized an agreement exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. The deal excludes U.S.-based multinational firms from the 15% global minimum tax negotiated through the OECD. It also effectively blocks other countries from imposing more levies on some foreign subsidiaries of U.S. multinationals. Saudi Arabia cutting the price of its flagship crude for Asia for a third month amid signs of oversupply in the market. State producer Saudi Aramco lowered the price of its Arab Light grade to 30% premium to the regional benchmark for February. And this comes as OPEC Plus sticks with its plan to pause supply increases in the first quarter. Paul?
Let's take a look at how commodities are tracking. Copper, we need to point out, did top $13,000 a ton. There's a rush to ship to the US on concerns of future tariff risks. There's also been a number of supply disruptions over recent months, the latest being a strike at a mine in Chile. Oil prices, meanwhile, a little bit softer today. More to come on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Upwork is the best tool to find and hire high-quality freelance talent. It's free to post, and you don't pay till you hire. Upwork.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung have reaffirmed bilateral ties at their second meeting in 2 months. It's a sign that both sides are working to stabilize relations amid geopolitical tensions. Let's get to our China correspondent, Min Min Lo in Hong Kong. So Min Min, tell us a little bit about the tone of the meeting, and there were quite a lot of MOUs signed as well. What came out of it that was concrete?
Yeah, it was pretty positive, I would say, the tone of it, because this is the second meeting in a couple of months, coming just after the two presidents met in South Korea. So the frequency has been quite high, and President Xi pointing to that as a sign of how important the relationship is. And Lee Jae-myung as well, saying that he wants to start a new era of South Korea-China relations, and that 2026 could be the year where we see a full reset of relations. And one of the things that was quite critical, I think, is that Lee Jae-myung managed to secure a resumption of a ministerial level economic dialogue that was frozen since the THAAD missile crisis. So that's an important breakthrough. And when it comes to trade, I think one of the issues that South Korea is concerned about is that their trade surplus with China has turned into a deficit since 2023 as China started to produce more advanced manufacturing domestically. So President Lee was looking to expand trade, especially in areas like AI, like industrial, cultural goods as well. So he cited things like beauty products, like films, games, and so on as potential areas for breakthroughs. And we know that China has put an informal ban on South Korean cultural goods since that missile crisis as well. This is where the presidential aide of Korea has said it could take some time for that to resume, but they are hopeful that if trust continues to build, we could see perhaps
Hello, Chula, buenos días. No, eso no es suficiente. Yo te dije cuánto necesito porque yo te dije el para qué era. Bueno, pues está bien. Tú vive en tu paz entonces. Si lo que tú hiciste está bien, tú vive en tu paz. ¿Ok? Gracias por tu dolor. Gracias por todo el dolor. Gracias. Sí, recuérdate, cuando Ajá, tú te recuerdas, ¿verdad? Ok. Cuando había oscuridad, nada más había una fuente de luz, ¿te recuerdas? Ok. Ok, pues está bien. Que Dios te bendiga y gracias por todas tus maldiciones. Se te agradece mucho. Gracias por todas tus maldiciones. Eso es lo que es para que uno fracase. Ya lo sabes.
To resume, but they are hopeful that as trust continues to build, we could see perhaps potentially large-scale K-pop concerts being held in Beijing again in the longer term.
That being said, Min, all this is coming against a backdrop of really fraught geopolitical tensions. How exactly is all this shaping China-Korea relations?
Yeah, so this is a tricky thing because it seems like perhaps some of the wins that President Lee Jae-myung had gained is coming at the expense of pressure from China to, quote, stand on the right side of history, because we all know about the China-Japan crisis going on because of Takaichi's comments, and China has been trying to shore up closer ties with South Korea in that crisis, pointing to their efforts during World War II to fight against Japanese militarism together. And President Lee Jae-myung had reaffirmed that South Korea would respect that one China principle. But the other more tricky issue is also North Korea, which fired what is suspected to be ballistic missiles just ahead of that visit. And it's coming after the U.S. has seized President Maduro as well, which some analysts are saying is sending a message to North Korea that it would be suicide for them to abandon their nuclear program. So South Korea has asked for Beijing's help to advance peace in the Korean Peninsula, given that they have been a major economic lifeline to North Korea. But at the same time, that denuclearization push is going to be even harder after that Venezuelan crisis. And it's hard to say what China can do to rein in a leader that is as unpredictable as Kim Jong-un.
Right, that's Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Lo there. Getting a little bit more news on the situation in Venezuela. Politico has a report, according to a U.S. official familiar with the matter, that the U.S. has made 3 demands of acting President Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. They say they want to see a crackdown on drug flows, kicking out Iranian, Cuban, and other operatives of countries or networks that are hostile to Washington, and also stop the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries. Now, this is Politico reporting, according to a U.S. official familiar with the situation. Delcy Rodriguez so far has been cooperative. She doesn't appear to have a lot of choice in the matter. President Trump previously warning that more military action will be coming if Venezuela does not behave. There will be a second strike. Former U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says China and Russia have benefited by getting cheap Venezuelan oil. He told exclusively that President Trump's vision for a U.S.-led revival of Venezuela's oil industry will be a long, complex, and expensive undertaking.
Well, there's a lot that needs to be done. In terms of laws, Venezuela has the weakest property rights laws in the whole world. So that has to be fixed so that you have some assurance of private sector continuing ownership. But I think realistically, companies going in now in a relatively complex situation are probably going to guarantees against expropriation. And that's not unusual. The U.S. and multinational entities often give expatriation and foreign exchange guarantees.
You got an amazing heart.
The debt structure is mind-bogglingly complicated. They have about 160 billion of debt altogether,
once you come back from that,
expatriation claims, counting.
It was a lot of, I was on my knees, yo, God, please, one day.
Those bonds have been trading in the high teens, low 20s. They could probably
my lawyer's talking
be
about, good morning, my love. My lawyer's talking about 6, 7, 8 months. I'm like, no, take your time, it's cool. I'll be right here.
Big number. And one of the few good things is that the IMF has
ready to go. That's it. That's the secret, yo. I'm telling you. That little, that gives me everything.
up to $50 billion. So they could very well be a source of some funding.
If I can just jump in on that point before we continue, Wilbur, because some of the exposure we do understand comes from China and debt owed to Chinese banks, for example. If there is a restructuring of debt in the country, do you expect the U.S. to exert force of who gets priority in the capital stack? Does it change where back payments and different restructuring comes from, just given the geopolitics of the moment between the U.S. and China?
Right, well, both the Chinese and the Russians had made loans to Venezuela that are payable at least partly in oil, but oil at very, very advantageous prices to them. So they are part of the problem in that they're getting oil very cheaply out of Venezuela in return for debts that otherwise are never going to be paid. Now, the oil that comes out of Venezuela is mostly what we call heavy oil, and that requires a slightly different refining process from the American shale oil, which is mostly light oil. Both China and India have very strong facilities for processing heavy oil because a lot of the Iranian oil that they have been getting also is heavy.
Let a local expert do your taxes from start to finish. TurboTax Expert full service. Get started by answering a few questions. Then, we'll match you to a local expert who can handle your tax situation. Connect with your expert in real time, even on nights and weekends during tax season, while they work to maximize your return. And we'll create a personalized checklist to make things easy. Get the
Iranian oil that they have been getting also is heavy.
Former U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross speaking to Bloomberg's Danny Berger. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at how futures are shaping up. We are expecting Asia stocks to extend from already those record highs clocked a day ago. Futures on the Nikkei pointing to that upside. We are seeing S&P 500 futures flat. Worth noting that on the Nasdaq 100, we saw it snapping that 5-day slide, and this was supported by a jump in mega caps, including Amazon, Tesla, also keeping track of Nvidia following these comments from the Nvidia chief, Jensen Huang, confirming that Vera Rubin chips will be shipped in the second half. Let's bring in Evan Devitt, Senior Investment Advisor at Moneta, for some analysis on what's to come in markets. Evan, great to see you. We want to focus on tech. I think you think that we might see a bit of that rethink continuing. What do you think that AI play is going to look like in the next couple of weeks?
It's interesting you're mentioning an AI play. It's like, almost what AI play? Where our news flow has been dominated by geopolitics and the turn of the year in metals, and now we're back to AI again. So I think the key thing on AI is that the trends we saw at the end of the year are continuing into 2026. There is still that debate as to whether the demand in AI can be sustained, whether the capex is appropriate, and where the winners and losers will be. We're not discussing it right now, generally on the headlines, but that is still a permeating debate. And we at Moneta are advising a diversification beyond tech, beyond the large cap, beyond the US borders, into the global portfolio that we've always advocated for. But we think now more than ever, it's the time to shore up exposures. You're in Asia there. The Asian market has done extremely well relative to the US and to Europe, and tech has been a big part of that. So we think that there are ways to get exposure to this beyond the traditional Mag 7 concentration, which has been so dominant in 25.
What exactly are some of the ways you're advocating for Asia?
Yeah, well, Asia we see as part of our general equity bucket, and we have a global equity portfolio that we've always advocated. That would generally not have a high exposure to emerging markets from a US vantage point, but it has enough exposure to provide diversification. We also have always looked at the picks and shovels aspect of AI, and that has been represented in our real assets and private asset segment from a client portfolio, and that has always been global. I will say that Asia has not been a large percentage of private asset portfolios, but we think that should grow. It'll depend on opportunities and how they are presented essentially within those global portfolios. But I would say that there's a very open mind. We've gone from clients looking at China as perhaps being uninvestable, something they should avoid, to really piquing interest again, especially towards the end of 25, and the numbers have told that story.
Even inevitably, when we have these conversations, there is a discussion of bubbles, risk, overspending, overvaluation. Are there any pockets of the market that do look a little bit risky to you when it does come to the AI story?
I'd say that basic AI story is it's actually fraught with risk right now. And how we are translating that for clients is to think about the concentration and the risk that we can expect from an equity portfolio. That has fundamentally changed over the last 18 months. When the concentration has risen as it has, when we have individual companies like, say, Alphabet, NVIDIA, when their market cap is just so large relative to other entire country forces, that's when we have to think that this portfolio is going to behave differently. So we would say that the entire, actually, even just a passive equity exposure is going to have a different risk-reward profile. We have to ask clients, is this what you expect from your equity portfolio? Are you content to settle for less than shooting the lights out, less than participating in indices? Are you prepared to settle for a steady single-digit return that compounded can be less volatile and ultimately deliver according to your goals? So I think getting away from those high-risk sectors, at least diversifying and diluting their presence within a portfolio.
And we were talking about the geopolitical tension earlier. We've seen a bit of a rally in defence stocks as well, but we have a chart on the Bloomberg terminal that indicates some of the run-up that these defence names have had, but they do have a bit of a mixed record when it comes to holding on to some of those gains. So how enduring do you see this rally in defence names being?
This is probably the only sector that we see being most, say, dependent on the geopolitical headlines. It was interesting that the defence stocks in Europe have done so well. That's been really, say, quite a sustained trajectory until whenever we see rumours that there will be perhaps peace in Ukraine, that sadly is not on the horizon yet. But when we see it coming into a higher probability, those defence stocks do fall away. And I would say that that's perhaps suggesting there's too much momentum in these stocks right now. There's no reason this should fall away. The investment in defence is a long-term strategic shift that we have not seen for decades in Europe and is now fundamentally changed given the way the New World Order is being rearranged essentially even in the last few weeks. So I would say that they are long-term trends. We are bullish generally on defence stocks. The rearming of the world is not necessarily a good thing for humankind, but it is, I think it's inevitable given the way new alliances are being drafted. So that is a sustained trajectory, we believe, but there will be volatility as it does move around with the geopolitical headlines.
At Wayfair, we're game for every style.
Let's play charades. Oh, I've got my favorite chair. Got it. All right, ready?
Yeah.
This one rocking chair.
Velvet up to Chase Lounger.
This is charades. Loungers are off limits.
Well, there's no rule about adding it to my cart.
It's a good deal.
This barrel swivel chair. Yes! Wow!
Wow. Not my first charade.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
If you live in Florida and have a good driving record, you're being scammed by big auto insurance. Listen up.
Headlines.
How much volatility are you expecting on tech if you're saying that maybe there's more pain to come down the road? And what might some of the implications cross assets be if we see that unwinding?
One of the themes that we've been developing at Moneta for 2026 is this idea of enough or saturation point. We already know that consumers are clamoring for more affordability. We also know that there is more pushback around AI from a moral standpoint, a heightened focus on the ethics of rolling this out so quickly, and equally looking at the world, your region, Australia, with the social media ban for under 16s. That's been looked at with extreme interest by certain jurisdictions and certain states, even within the US. So that we are going to see that create a new currency, and it's certainly a momentum building around that, as there has been such a rapacious build of AI and really little time to pause and little regulatory pushback. But we see 2026 being a year of saturation and a year of enough. That will also threaten data center build. We've already seen some pullback around financing of data centers in the US, a hesitation of some of the private credit players to step up more equity for some of those build outs. We've also seen communities push back, and that being a populist cry to push back on data center build because it threatens electricity supply and pricing in that region, and that affects affordability. So these are more subtle pushbacks to tech that we see growing in importance in 2026.
Where does all this leave energy-related stocks?
Actually, the story, a bit like the defense stock story, the story for energy is resoundingly positive. What we do know is looking at, say, the clean energy index, that was up over 40% in 2025. A very surprising result, I would say, looking at the variable headwinds that there were from the Trump administration towards clean energy. The fact that clean energy could do so well when oil was so weak shows that there is a strong demand for energy around the world. That is very much being driven not only by AI, but by the pace of economic growth, and therefore being long energy stocks. And even in the oil side, if the oil price has been depressed, this news around Venezuela, the idea that there is going to be a reclaiming of stolen oil, whatever the narrative is woven, this would generally open up opportunities for some of the oil majors. So I would say between the sustainable energy story and that, it is a strong picture for energy stocks in the year ahead.
Eva, really good to get your thoughts on the markets in the year ahead. Eva David is Senior Investment Advisor at Moneta. Now, speaking of energy stocks, they were among the sectors that did well in Japan as well, just a day ago. But overall, stocks that hit a record, and this was, of course, the first day of trading this year. CEOs of the country's biggest brokerages predicting that the best is yet to come. Let's bring in our Japan equities reporter, Alice French. So, Alice, a lot of bullishness from these brokerages. What are they saying are factors that are going to be driving this for the rest of the year?
Yes, as you say, there's a lot of bullishness, a lot of optimism starting this 2026. We have the CEO of Daiwa predicting that the Nikkei might even go as far as 62,000 by the end of this year, which, considering it only hit 50,000 kind of partway through last year, is a pretty big bet. It seems that a lot of the optimism is being driven by this continued momentum behind corporate reform, right? So we know that Japan's corporate governance code is up for revision again this summer. People particularly expecting that companies' cash holdings are going to be targeted this time. So we've already seen, quite a few movements towards more capital efficiency. We've seen things like cross-shareholdings being targeted, and that's really drawn in a lot of investor interest, particularly from activists and from foreign investors. That is expected to continue this year. And also just overall corporate performance, right? These brokerages and analysts are expecting profits to go up this year. I think that's partly because of a weaker than expected yen, which of course is good news for exporters. But yeah, overall, we've started the year with a bang, and it seems like the optimism is set to continue for a while.
So a weak yen, expectation of higher profits. Is there anything else driving all the New Year's optimism?
Yeah, so domestically, right, we've got Prime Minister Takaichi, and we know that she has these big fiscal spending plans. Now, people are expecting those to help sectors from things like quantum computing to construction through to, of course, AI and things like defense. So all of that extra government spending is expected to be a tailwind for a lot of sectors. Now, of course, Takaichi will have to balance that with the kind of potential fiscal burden and the jitters in the bond market that we saw a lot last year. But overall, there's optimism for that government spending. Of course, there's also AI, we can't not talk about it. And in Japan, there are a lot of robotics makers, for example. We know that we've seen this sort of shift towards physical AI. SoftBank has been making some bets on that in the past few months, for example. So robotics firms like Yaskawa Electric, for example, Fanuc expected to do well on that bullishness this year. But we'll see how it goes. There are lots of different areas of the market that investors are expecting to kind of outperform their global peers this year.
What are the potential factors that could derail all of this? What are the downside risks?
Hi, honey. I got in. Oh, she got in. Oh my God! She got in.
Wow, this is actually happening. 4 years of tuition, plus textbooks, housing. What if she decides to study abroad? Am I going to have to change my retirement plans? Lay it on me, Quicken. Do I need to start driving rideshare?
We're going to college.
Stop guessing and start knowing with Quicken.
Did good.
Do they all live happily ever after? The end. Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite.
Bed bugs?
Baby, what's wrong? You okay?
Right. Whilst there's a lot of optimism, we've also, of course, got to think that it can't all be good news. And I mean, just yesterday we had some data out from department stores, for example, showing that tourist spending is going down. Now we know that China and Japan do still have this ongoing diplomatic spat after Takaichi's comments on Taiwan. That does seem to be hitting Chinese tourism here, and we know that Chinese tourists are one of the biggest spenders in Japan. Of course, inbound tourism up at record levels in 2025, expected to continue this year. That had really been a tailwind for consumer stocks, department stores, of course, but also retail things like fast retailing, Uniqlo, Muji, all of those kind of tourist favorites. Now, we may see that weigh on those retail stocks today. It'll be interesting to see how they perform because they had already dropped quite a lot towards the end of last year. And of course, we have the volatility that Ethan was just talking about, that we've already seen sell-offs in AI stocks. There is kind of this sense of perhaps a little bit of overvaluation or overbuying that could continue to weigh on some of those outperforming tech stocks. And of course, the backdrop to all of this is the yen, where we know there's been volatility. It's weaker than a lot of people had expected going into 2025. Let's see how it plays out this year. But, that has a big impact on stocks. And of course, while the weak yen is good for exporters, it does tend to weigh more on the kind of domestically focused stocks. So there are definitely some things to keep an eye on, but overall the mood is definitely optimism, and it's been a good new year so far.
All right, Japan stocks reporter Alice French there. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Latest from the corporate front, Tesla's China factory shipments fell 7% in 2025 despite a last-minute bump in December. Preliminary data from China's Passenger Car Association show the automaker shipped more than 851,000 vehicles last year from its Shanghai plant. Tesla is struggling with a slowdown in global sales, losing its title as the world's largest EV maker to China's BYD. Bloomberg has learned that Goldman Sachs is raising a Japan real estate fund targeting about $500 million for property deals. Sources say Goldman has been pitching investors in recent months looking to take advantage of a resurgence in Japan's property market, something we'll continue tracking. This is Bloomberg. This is the Asia trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens. Of course, Paul, we did see markets in the region just a day ago managing to shrug off those geopolitical concerns, reaching the region's benchmark record highs. AI enthusiasm still flowing through, and perhaps also supported by some of these comments from the NVIDIA chief, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Normal service resumed there. NVIDIA also confirming that it's got some of those new chips heading for production. We'll bring you more on that story in a moment. But that AI narrative just keeps rolling on. Never mind geopolitical tension.
As we keep track of that, let's take a look at how Asia markets are shaping up, particularly in Japan. We do have a 10-year auction for JGBs, and with yields at these levels, something that it might be enough to draw in short-term investors, despite those lingering concerns about inflation and the idea of the BOJ being behind the curve. You are seeing yields for the moment moving a little lower in terms of stocks. We saw it being supported by not just tech names just a day ago, but also energy, financial related stocks, something to keep track on in the session as well. Take a look at how South Korea is faring in the early goings. We do have local media reports that the likes of SK Hynix and Samsung are looking at potential price hikes for their DRAM, the server DRAM. So again, another potential bullish signal when it comes to the tech sector. We are seeing a bit of reversal for the Kospi though for the moment, despite reaching those record highs just a day ago, Paul.
It was a good day for U.S. markets as well. We saw the S&P climbing. Chevron had its best day since April. The oil company up more than 5%. Let's take a look at our bonds are tracking as well. The yield on the 10-year just ticking up a little bit. We did see an unexpected drop for the ISM manufacturing gauge in December, and that did help yields move a little lower in the U.S. But we do get jobs numbers later on this week. It's going to be the first clean jobs report we've had since that 6-week shutdown, and that's going to be key in terms of predicting the next moves from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Crude prices, meanwhile, slipping a little bit, but we did see oil markets broadly shrugging off all of that news flow out of Venezuela. Venezuelan oil exports, meanwhile, did fall to a 17-month low back in December due to the U.S. blockade. April.
Yeah, we saw overnight how tech bounced back. We're tracking NVIDIA as well because its chief, Jensen Huang, says their highly anticipated new Rubin data center products are nearing release this year. Speaking at CES in Las Vegas, Huang said customers will soon be able to try out the technology, helping speed up AI development.
This is the Vera CPU. It's got 88 CPU cores, and the CPU cores are designed to be multi-threaded. But the multi-threaded nature of Vera was designed so that each one of the 176 threads could get its full performance. So it's essentially as if there's 176 cores, but only 88 physical cores. So these cores were designed in using a technology called spatial multi-threading. But the I/O performance is incredible.
I just took a shower at work with Dallas. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380.
Behind this advisor are Vanguard's institutional quality bond funds, powered by a deep bench of experts who have outperformed peers over the last 10 years. Are you backed by institutional quality bond funds? Vanguard, discipline that delivers.
Our Bloomberg tech co-anchor Ed Ludlow joins us live from the event in Las Vegas. So Ed, a couple of things top of mind from what the NVIDIA CEO has been talking about, but I think the Vera Rubin confirmation really stands out.
Yeah, that's the news headline. Vera Rubin has entered full production. And it's important because NVIDIA commits to this annual cadence, having a new generation of GPU or high-performance compute system every year. The Vera Rubin system, if you try and do it as a like-for-like with Blackwell, 1 gigawatt of capacity in a data center with Vera Rubin has 10 times the throughput of a Blackwell system, but it generates tokens at 1/10 of the cost. So if you are one of the hyperscalers selling that service and that gear, or you're a frontier AI lab that is training the model or running inference, it's a massive change in the economics for you. But also generation to generation, NVIDIA owns more of the content of a server rack and the server design as a whole. Every generation that comes out, they go from having owned just the GPU to basically the full content of what's in there, which will impact margins going forward. What I would say is that after his big on stage moment, he huddled with analysts and confirmed that this will likely ship in the second half of this year, which they'd already said anyway in November. But it gave the market some confidence in the moment. The stock was a little negative in after hours. It came up, it ended up flat.
Yeah, and news comments from NVIDIA so closely watched. Is there a risk the market could be disappointed in what it heard?
there is a serious risk. There were several notes going into this keynote that this was the start of the year. This was going to launch 2026 for the AI story. And even though this is called the Consumer Electronics Show, this was about infrastructure, the highest level infrastructure. And we didn't really get the same level of forecast or big picture that we had from other NVIDIA events last year, like at GTC and DC in October, where Jensen kind of almost off script told us how much revenue they would get from those new combined systems. That said, it's a 4-day kind of thing, and Jensen Huang is here. We have more comments from him after the keynote confirming different things, and then we'll speak to him on Bloomberg Television tomorrow, right? So it's a situation where you brace for headlines, but really interested to see how the sell side and the buy side reacts to that keynote in the morning.
And some of these headlines about NVIDIA addressing the concerns about demand from China as well.
Yep. Analysts have had a chance to speak with Jensen, and analysts have been asking him about recent news reports. Here's the situation with H200. Jensen confirmed that NVIDIA has submitted the licenses to the US government to export H200 to China. The government is reviewing those licenses. It's important to note that when a license application goes in, it can sit on someone's desk at the Commerce Department for a very long time. And so there may be a muted sort of reaction by the markets to that. On the demand side, Jensen Huang said, there is great demand in China, which would counter the reports that have come out of China that at least the government has put pressure on those domestic tech names to use the domestic option. But for now, it's very much a wait and see. And again, I think it's one of the questions people will continue to ask here over a couple of days. He was also asked a little bit about the Grok acquisition that's not really an acquisition, maybe an acqui-hire. And he was talking about how they might do something very unique and specific together, but that Grok was struggling to find its place in AI. Remember, Grok had a very inference-focused platform. And right now, the situation is the CEO and its COO are heading to NVIDIA with some kind of licensing deal for the tech. It would be interesting if they bring a new platform-specific product that's new to market, but it's maybe something we find out about in the coming days.
And thanks for putting things in context for us. Bloomberg Tech co-anchor Ed Ludlow at the CES in Las Vegas. Now, we're also tracking some of the stocks related to NVIDIA. It's been mixed for the moment. Declines on the likes of Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, but of course, they did do pretty well a day ago. Overall, chips in the rest of the region still look to be quite supported. We are also tracking some of the moves related to Hyundai. It has talked about some of this new developments related to its humanoid robot and development surrounding its Boston Dynamics unit. So we are seeing that extension of gains. Hyundai Motors is up 7+%. Now let's bring in our next guest who sees increasing risks of stagflation and expects U.S. stocks to end 2026 in negative territory. With us now is Peter Kim, Global Investment Strategist at KB Securities. Peter, good to see you as always. We've just been talking to our colleague Ed Ludlow, who's at the tech event in Las Vegas, the CES. There's still a lot of, I suppose, optimism surrounding AI, chip-related stocks, but you see that risk of reversal for tech in the U.S. What is behind that view?
I think the fervor that we've seen for the past couple of years on AI is probably not even half over. I think it's now a matter of how much the prices and expectations are priced in. Also, increasingly, who's the bigger beneficiary? Is it now Asia or the US? And I think that's probably the question, but I hardly think that we should be worrying about the end of the AI boom. I mean, the investments that are being placed into the technology is only started.
Are you looking to establish your business using an address other than your home? Wish you had a professional business address and phone number.
Technology is only started.
Is that why you see the chance of continued outperformance in South Korea stocks for this year, despite what we saw already in 2025?
Absolutely. I mean, during this early stage of the investment cycle of transformative technologies like AI, the hardware is the safest place to be. We have to remember that oversupply situation is still probably 2-3 years away on the memory chips. At this stage, not only are companies striving for dominance in this sector, but also the countries. I mean, China wants to dominate, not just for its sector, but as a supremacy on a national basis. So I feel very comfortable. I was here a few months ago saying how the technology boom is going to extend well into 26, and I still hold on to that belief.
So, Peter, what's the best way to get exposure to this then? Because some of the names, particularly the Magnificent Seven, are looking pretty expensive. So where do you look? Do you look at those big names? Do you look at China? Do you look at SK Hynix, picks and shovels, energy companies, or an ETF? What's your preferred method to allocate?
As I said, for now, I think semiconductors is the safest place to be. We have to remember that as much as the long-term demand outlook for AI may be a little uncertain, the supply constraints on the semiconductors is already proven. And I think it'll be 1 or 2 years before we start to have that supply catch up to the current demand outlook. And therefore, that's why I think the Korean semiconductors and probably at some point, perhaps some of the hyperscalers coming from Asia might be interesting as a second stage, but I still believe that it's as a risk reward. Semiconductors is going to be a very good place to be for investors.
All right, and in terms of the China story, do you anticipate any reforms or support for the local heroes of the chip-making industry in China?
I mean, China's got a bigger problem where it's declining domestic economy, the overcapacities in many sectors, the involution. These are all structural problems. So as much as exciting the technology sector is, I think the policymakers from China will be very cognizant of not falling into the same supply glut that they've seen in autos and so many other industries. So it's a tricky one. Certainly they're striving for tech supremacy is there, but overdoing it, I think, has led to many problems. So I think they want to continue to try to see the right balance rather than going all in.
Does that mean we might have to wait a little longer for a bit of a pro-stimulus approach from Chinese authorities? And what is that going to mean for the trajectory for the rest of the year for Chinese stocks?
Yeah, so China has gone through a very, very difficult phase last year with the tariff war, slowing domestic economy, and one way of resolving that has been to just export their way out. We've seen their exports to U.S. decline, but conversely, the rest of the world has more than compensated on the export side. However, now going to this year, I think they need to provide some sort of a backstop on structural reform in order to provide a better runway, rather than just sort of going for what we consider to be profitless growth and the export side. So I do expect there to be more reform, but probably not so much that it leads to a recession of any kind. So again, it'll be a little more balanced approach rather than just trying to find time by going for export growth.
What is your sense of the extent in which Asia can outperform versus global US peers this year?
So last year, we've had a lot of debate about US dollar depreciation as the anchor for emerging market stocks. Now, again, I've mentioned a few months ago that I consider this US dollar weekly to be more cyclical rather than structural. Now that the US dollar has stabilized, perhaps we need to see more earnings coming through from the EM stocks. And I think it's a good foundation. I think the valuations are supportive relative to U.S. Earnings have started to pick up, and certainly in Korea, we've had earnings really looking good. So I think perhaps this time it may be more earnings driven rather than currency or macro like we have seen last year.
All right, Peter Kevin, Global Investment Strategist at KB Securities. Thanks so much for joining us today with your insights. We have more heads on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has faced the U.S. court along with his wife, pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges. Their appearance before a New York judge sets off an extraordinary legal battle with major geopolitical ramifications. Let's bring in Bloomberg managing editor Jill Deeser. So, Jill, Maduro in court saying he's innocent, saying he's a decent man. What else are we hearing there?
Well, April, this is an extraordinarily complicated case, as you can imagine. Obviously, after this, as they were arraigned in court, Maduro and his wife continuing to assert their innocence. The U.S., of course, accusing them of sort of leading this operation that effectively exported thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States. As you mentioned, this host of narco-terrorism charges. Really, though, at this point, the question is ultimately going to become more about, whether Maduro was an illegitimate leader or the leader of a sovereign nation who shouldn't have been, sort of taken from Venezuela, brought to the United States to face these charges. His attorney is Barry Pollock, actually. Some of his former clients include Julian Assange. You've got, again, just a very extraordinary case here. We'll have to see ultimately how this develops. But yes, certainly I think it's no surprise there that Maduro is asserting his influence. If this does end up turning into, say, a jury trial, I think we're in for something that is even more incredibly complex.
Yeah, well, Jill, back in Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez now sworn in as acting president. She's been striking a conciliatory tone with the U.S., but really, does she have a lot of choice here?
Last week, you were running the standard playbook of a Lux Beauty CEO. Today, thanks to PwC's Industry Edge, you're anticipating how agentic AI will dictate your customers' desires.
The data, there's too much of it.
That's okay. SAS Via builds models and makes decisions, so you don't have to freak out.
But we like freaking out.
We're getting so much done! From data to ta-da, SAS Via.
Well, I think at this point, Paul, it's very, very complicated situation here. She, of course, was criticizing the United States. Maduro was first taken out of the country over the weekend, but Trump has made clear that he says potentially we could work with this regime, and he hasn't pushed for full scale regime change if you're leaving some of these Maduro loyalists, including Rodriguez, in power. So perhaps that conciliatory tone makes sense there, but at the same time, you're looking at some of the things that are happening on the ground in Venezuela. She was sworn into office as acting president, but you're still seeing some pretty heavy military presence in Venezuela on those streets, including from the colectivos and some of those military armed members. So you do have a question about whether or not this actually is something that it results in a situation where the U.S. can work with Venezuela without action.
On the Asia trade, we stopped at 104.25. Okay, those will be the first few chapters. We're gonna jet back to check on our charity. We're going to go to a brick and mortar location. I have another real estate opportunity to go take a look at. We'll be right back. We should be back in the office in a few minutes. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. You have an amazing day today. May you conquer everything in your path. May everything you touch turn into solid gold, bars and silver bars, and beautiful and precious gemstones such as moissanite or laboratory-grown diamonds, or any laboratory-grown gemstone. Always remember to dream big, because dreams come true. It happened to me, and I know for a fact it's going to happen to you. Before I let you guys go, let's get a quick prayer. You guys ready? Thank you, Heavenly Father, for all the blessings in our lives. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for all the blessings in our lives. We worry not about what we don't have, because we're in the process of getting it. In that journey, everything we do is in your name. Amen. All right. So we'll tune right back in. We have a lot coming your way. We'll be right back faster than you can do this. Have an amazing day. Tune right back in.